I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, not hesitant, not gentle. The kind of knock that announced ownership, not arrival. At first I thought it was a neighbor, or maybe the delivery I'd been expecting. The morning was quiet. Golden light spilling through my kitchen window, catching on the steam curling up from my mug. For the first time all week I felt calm. I'd worked late nights to earn that calm. The new promotion, the quiet apartment, the silence that didn't demand anything from me. But when I opened the door, that peace shattered. Hello, darling. There she was. My mother. Perfect hair, perfect lipstick, the faint scent of her perfume. Chanel No. 5, always too strong, drifting through the hallway like a warning. And behind her, Jason, my brother, his grin crooked, suitcase in hand, eyes already scanning the living room behind me like he was checking into a hotel. I froze. Mom, what are you doing here? She stepped inside before I finished the question, her heels clicking against my wooden floor. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She was already looking around, the framed photos on the wall, the vase on the dining table, the minimalist calm I'd curated for myself, as if she were taking inventory. So, she said finally, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. This is where all my money went. The words cut deeper than she knew. Or maybe she knew exactly. Jason dropped his bag and flopped onto my couch, legs sprawled wide. Nice place, sis, he said, grabbing the TV remote. Got anything to drink? Water, I said flatly. Boring, he muttered, already channel surfing. I turned back to my mother, who was now circling my living room like an appraiser. Her eyes landed on a framed photo. Me on my first day at the firm, smiling, nervous, clutching a file like a shield. She smiled faintly. You didn't tell us you got a promotion. My stomach dropped. How did you— People talk, she said simply, cutting me off. Your aunt ran into one of your coworkers at a fundraiser. Apparently you're doing quite well for yourself now. I'm proud of you, darling. Her tone said otherwise. I was going to tell you, I said quietly. Eventually, she repeated, her gaze sweeping across the room again. I see you've been busy decorating. Expensive taste, there it was. The familiar shift. Her voice sliding from sweet to sharp, like the click of a lock. I forced a smile. Would you like some coffee? Please, she said, settling herself on a chair like a queen taking her throne. I went to the kitchen, every movement mechanical, pouring, stirring, breathing through the rising anxiety that burned like acid in my chest. Behind me, I could hear her speaking to Jason. You should really find a place like this, Jason. Look how well your sister's done. He laughed. Sure, soon as someone pays off my student loans and car. Mom's voice softened, indulgent. We'll figure it out, sweetheart. I set the coffee down in front of her. Mom, how long are you staying? She looked up, feigning surprise. Oh, I didn't say. We're just in town for a while. Jason needs some space to clear his head. Things at home have been difficult. I felt my pulse quicken. At home. Mom, I thought you sold the house. I did, she said lightly, stirring her coffee. Renting for now. But Jason's been struggling. It's not easy for him, you know. After everything. That phrase. Her shield for every bad choice he'd ever made. Jason looked up from the couch. Yeah, my landlord's a jerk. Kicked me out for being late. Just need to crash here for a bit. I stared at him. Crash here? Mom smiled, setting her spoon down with a soft clink. Don't look so alarmed, dear. You have 2 bedrooms, don't you? It's only fair. Family helps family. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls closer. I wanted to scream. To remind her that I'd spent years clawing my way out of that cycle. Of paying Jason's bills. Of taking her calls at midnight. Of drowning in guilt dressed as obligation. But her eyes, that familiar, sharp gaze, pinned me to silence. Over lunch, she began her performance in full. Casual remarks about how lonely she'd been, how hard life had become since Dad left, how some people had more than enough to share. Then she dropped it. I know about your new salary, she said, slicing through her salad like it had personally offended her. Your aunt mentioned it, and Jason could really use some help. He's fallen behind again, poor thing. Mom, I'm not asking for much, she interrupted smoothly. Just enough to cover a few things. To do what's right. After all, you wouldn't have this life without the foundation we gave you. My appetite vanished. Do what's right? I repeated quietly. Yes. Her eyes locked onto mine. Give back. Jason avoided my gaze. Picking at his food. Silence. Stretched across the table like a blade. Then, she reached into her handbag. That same old beige purse she'd had for years. And slid an envelope across the table. This will help you understand what we're dealing with, she said softly. I stared at it. The paper was thick, smooth. Inside, I could already see the edges of overdue notices, red stamps bleeding through. I can't keep doing this, I whispered. You can, she replied, smiling faintly, and you will. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. The air around me thickened with the smell of coffee gone cold, perfume heavy in my lungs, guilt clawing at my ribs. When they finally left the table, laughing about something trivial, I stayed behind, staring at that envelope. It sat between us like a declaration of war. The apartment that had once been my sanctuary now felt tainted, invaded. My hands trembled as I reached for the mug beside me, only to realize the coffee was untouched, the surface still, reflecting my pale face back at me. I didn't need to open the envelope to know what it contained. It wasn't about money. It was about control. And for the first time in my life, I felt the first ripple of a truth I'd never dared admit. My mother didn't want me to succeed. She wanted me to serve. They say the way we are loved as children teaches us what love should feel like. For me, love was quiet, conditional, and heavy. Something I earned by being good enough, calm enough, responsible enough. My mother's house always smelled of control. Even as a little girl, I remember the way the air shifted when she entered a room, how Jason and I would instinctively straighten our posture, how the faint click of her heels on the tile floor could hush us without a word. She ruled with silence, not shouting. Her anger wasn't loud. It was precise, surgical. A lifted eyebrow, a sigh. A disappointment so subtle it could make me crumble. Jason was the exception. He could do no wrong. When he came home muddy, bruised, or late for dinner, she'd just laugh. Boys will be boys, she'd say, dabbing antiseptic on his scrapes like he was made of gold. But when I forgot to wash a dish, her tone would cool. I expected better from you, Emily. It took me years to understand that I was never the daughter. I was the proof. The evidence that she'd done something right. Jason was her reflection of hope. I was her insurance policy. When Dad left, the balance of power in that house shifted overnight. I was 13. He didn't shout when he packed his bags. He just stopped looking at her. The last thing he said to me was, "Take care of your mother." And I did. God, I did. She wept in the kitchen for weeks, the sink overflowing with untouched dishes, the radio always tuned to sad love songs. I learned how to comfort her, how to say what she needed to hear. When the bills came, I sat beside her and helped her count. When Jason failed a class, I helped him rewrite essays. Mom used to say, "We're all each other has now." And at 14, I believed her. I didn't realize it was the first brick in a wall I'd spend decades trying to climb over. By the time I entered college, I was already her emotional spouse, listening to her heartbreaks, her worries, her long sighs about sacrifice. Jason dropped out in his first semester. "He just needs time," she said, voice trembling between worry and denial. "He's special. He'll find his way." I found mine, but it didn't feel like triumph. I worked 2 jobs to stay in school. Morning shifts at the cafe, night shifts at the library. I remember counting tips in the dark, knowing most of it would go home to pay her rent. Each time I sent the transfer, she'd text, "You're a good girl. I don't know what I'd do without you." Those words, "good girl," were both a medal and a chain. When graduation came, I expected her to smile, maybe even to say she was proud. Instead, she said, "Now you can finally help the family properly. Not yourself, not your dreams." The family, and I did. Every paycheck, a portion went home. Jason called occasionally, always needing a small favor. Mom defended him each time. He's just struggling, dear. He doesn't have your discipline." I started to resent her tone when she said that, as if my discipline was something she owned, not something I'd fought for. But I kept sending money. I kept being the good daughter, because love, in our home, wasn't given freely. It was earned, through obedience. When I finally moved to another city, it wasn't rebellion. It was survival. My first apartment was tiny. One window, peeling paint, a bed that creaked every time I breathed. But it was mine. I remember lying there that first night, staring at the ceiling, terrified and liberated at the same time. There was no one to wake me up, no one to guilt me into coming home early. For months, I'd still call her every Sunday, the habit ingrained in my bones. But the conversations always followed the same script. Jason's trying, but jobs are hard to find. I had to pay for a new washing machine. When will you visit? And then the sigh, the silence, the soft accusation hanging in the air. It was never what she said. It was what she didn't say that haunted me. In therapy, my counselor, Dr. Rhodes, called it emotional blackmail disguised as love. The first time she said those words, I laughed. But later that night, I cried harder than I had in years, because she was right. That's when I started learning new words: boundaries, autonomy, self-worth. Words that felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to another language entirely. I stopped sending money, slowly, quietly. I began saving for myself. I bought a few plants for my balcony, small green lives that didn't demand anything from me. I cooked for myself, filled my home with lavender candles and silence. Silence that was mine, and for a while, that was enough. I told myself I was healing, that I'd finally escaped her orbit. But deep down, I never stopped feeling like that little girl waiting for permission. Permission to rest, to enjoy, to exist without apology. I'd scroll through my phone sometimes, thumb hovering over her contact name, Mom, and imagine calling just to say, "I miss you." But I never did, because I knew what would follow. The sigh, the guilt, the subtle reminder that I was never enough unless I was giving. Still, a small part of me, the obedient daughter she built, hoped one day she'd call and just say, "I'm proud of you." That fragile hope is what made me open the door that morning without hesitation. It's why, when I saw her standing there, I didn't close it. Because for a single, foolish heartbeat, I thought maybe she'd come to tell me she missed me. Maybe she'd come to see me. Not my success, not my paycheck. Just me. But love, I've learned, isn't something she ever came to offer. It was something she came to collect. It started like a visit, a short one. Or at least that's what she said. "Just a few days, dear," my mother had murmured over the phone, her voice small but expectant. Jason's between places again, and I could use a little time away. A few days. That was all. But within hours of opening my door, my quiet apartment began to change. First, it was the suitcase, overstuffed, wheeled into the bedroom before I could even offer to help. Then, the way she claimed the bed, folding her clothes into my drawers like she had always lived here. "You don't mind the couch for a while, do you?" she asked, already plumping the pillows as if I'd said yes. By the second night, Jason had arrived. His entrance was louder, a door flung open, the smell of beer and smoke trailing behind him. "Hey, sis!" He'd grinned, pulling me into a hug that felt more like an invasion than affection. "Nice place you got. Real upgrade from home." He said home like it was still his, like it hadn't been foreclosed years ago. I stood there, my throat dry, watching as he kicked off his shoes, threw his jacket over my couch, and opened my fridge. Within a week, my sanctuary, my tiny, sacred space I'd built from scratch, wasn't mine anymore. Mom filled the kitchen with her old routines, rearranging everything. The lavender candle I lit every evening? Gone. Replaced by her strong, rose-scented one that reminded me of funerals. Jason left dishes piled in the sink, laundry scattered like he'd never learned what a hamper was. Every morning, I'd wake to the sound of her voice, soft and sharp, on the phone with relatives. "Yes, she's finally giving back. she'd boast. Took her a while, but she's grown into a good girl again. I'd stand frozen in the hallway, coffee cooling in my hands, listening to her turn my independence into her achievement. My apartment, my career, my peace, all framed as her reward. At work, my boss began to notice the dark circles under my eyes. "You all right, Emily?" he asked one morning, his tone cautious. "Just tired," I said. It was easier than explaining that I hadn't slept in my own bed in 10 days. At night, when the lights were off, I'd lie on the couch, staring at the ceiling, her words replaying like poison. "You've become selfish, dear. Money has hardened you. You used to be so caring." I'd whisper to the dark. "I'm still caring." But even my voice sounded unsure. Dr. Rhodes, my therapist, noticed too. "You're back in the cycle," she said gently during one session. "You're not obligated to drown to keep others afloat." I nodded, pretending to agree. But guilt is not something you unlearn overnight. It's a language your bones still speak, even when your heart knows better. Every time I thought of asking them to leave, I saw the 13-year-old version of me again. The one who promised Dad she'd take care of her mother. The one who still believed love was obedience. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon. I'd spent the morning cleaning, quietly, carefully, the way I used to when I was young. Jason had borrowed my car without asking. Mom sat in my armchair, knitting something I didn't recognize, the TV murmuring in the background. I went to my dresser to find a necklace, my grandmother's. She'd given it to me before she died. A delicate gold chain with a single pearl pendant. She'd whispered, "For when you find your freedom." It wasn't in its usual spot. I opened drawers, checked the bathroom, even the laundry basket. Nothing. Then I noticed the jewelry box on my nightstand. Open. "Mom," I called softly, trying to stay calm. "Did you move my necklace?" She didn't look up. "Which one?" "The gold one." "Grandma's." Her knitting needles clicked. "Ask Jason. He was in your room yesterday looking for the iron." My heart sank. "He what?" I found him sprawled on the balcony, cigarette in hand, using one of my teacups as an ashtray. "Jason," I said, my voice trembling, "did you take Grandma's necklace?" He barely flinched. "Yeah, I pawned it." "Chill out. I'll get it back once I sort things out." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy, the world tilting. "You pawned it?" I whispered. He shrugged, blowing smoke into the wind. "It's not like you wear it. Besides, we're family, right? What's yours is ours." Something in me cracked. I turned to Mom, hoping, foolishly, for outrage, for even a flicker of defense, but she just sighed, setting her knitting down as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "He needed help, Emily," she said softly. "Don't overreact. You can afford to buy another necklace." "It wasn't about money," I snapped. "It was hers. It was mine." Her eyes narrowed. That same look that had silenced me my whole life. "You've changed," she said coldly. "This city, this job, they've made you selfish. We're your family. We made you who you are." The words hit harder than any slap could. "I owe you?" I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Her smile, small, satisfied, cruel, made me shiver. "You owe us everything. Don't forget where you came from." That night, I locked myself in the bathroom. The mirror was unkind. My eyes were swollen, my lips pale. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. I thought of the girl who once believed being good would make her loved, and realized she was still trapped inside me, bleeding herself dry for approval that would never come. I slid down to the cold tile floor, arms wrapped around my knees, and cried quietly. The walls were thin. I could hear Jason's laughter from the living room, my mother's voice rising above it, telling some story about how proud she was of her children. It sounded like a lie now. No, it had always been one. My reflection stared back at me, trembling, small, but suddenly aware. This wasn't love. This was extraction, and I was done being mined. I pressed my palm against the mirror, whispering to the woman inside it, "You can stop now. You don't have to keep saving them." That night, I made a decision that felt like dying and being born at the same time. I didn't know how or when, but I would leave. Not the apartment, not the city. Them. I would leave the guilt, the roles, the invisible leash of obedience. For the first time in my life, I wanted to save someone. Not them, not the family that fed on my silence, but me. Dawn came like a whisper. Soft light poured through the blinds, gentle and unassuming, touching everything it could reach. The edge of the table, the half-drunk cup of tea, the crumpled blanket where my mother slept. I stood by the window, barefoot, clutching the strap of my suitcase. It was the same one I had used years ago when I first moved to the city. Cheap fabric, one broken wheel, but still holding the echoes of a girl who once believed in second chances. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to explain. In my bed, they both slept soundly. My mother, cocooned in my sheets, the faint scent of my perfume still lingering in the air. Jason, snoring softly on the couch, his arm dangling off the side like he'd claimed even gravity as his own. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd taken everything, my space, my peace, my rest, and now I was the one sneaking away in the dawn. I paused at the door, my keys cold in my hand. For a moment, guilt almost made me turn back. Almost. Then I remembered the necklace, the missing pearl, and I opened the door. The hallway smelled faintly of old paint and freedom. I didn't look back. I drove until the city turned into silence. Buildings gave way to open fields, then forests, then the faintest scent of salt in the air. My car's old engine hummed like a lullaby, the radio playing songs I couldn't hear. Somewhere between the highway and the coast, I realized I wasn't running from them anymore. I was running toward myself. By noon, I reached the town, a quiet stretch by the sea with weathered cottages and seagulls that screamed like they'd lost something too. I rented a small cabin on the edge of the shore, pale wood, creaky floors, one window facing the ocean. When I opened that window, the sound of waves filled the room like a heartbeat. For the first time in months, I exhaled. The air tasted of salt and something holy, something untouched. The first few days felt unreal. The silence was heavy, like a new language I hadn't yet learned. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and sit on the porch watching the tide crawl in and out. No phone calls, no demands, just the sea, breathing with me. I worked remotely, the soft hum of my laptop filling the emptiness. My boss, kind, patient, said he was proud of my progress, and I almost cried just hearing the word proud used without manipulation. I started to build small rituals. Yoga on the deck, journaling at night, therapy sessions through a grainy video call. I wrote letters I never sent, to my mother, to Jason, to the girl I used to be. Letters that started with "I forgive you" but ended with "I finally see you." One morning, I walked barefoot along the sand. The water was cold enough to sting, and I welcomed it. Pain, after all, had always been my proof of existence. That's when I met Clara. She was sitting on a driftwood log, sketching the horizon in a worn notebook. Her silver hair blew wildly in the wind, and when she looked up, her eyes carried the kind of peace that doesn't come easy. "Morning," she said, smiling. "You're new," I nodded. "Just moved here. Running from something?" Her question startled me. I hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe. Or running toward something." "I haven't decided yet," Clara chuckled. "Good answer. That day, she taught me how to walk the shoreline without apologizing for the footprints I left behind. But peace, I learned, doesn't arrive without ghosts." They came through the phone. The first voicemail from Mom arrived 3 days after I left. "Emily, how could you? You've abandoned your family. Jason's sick over this. You've become heartless. Do you even care what people will say?" The next one was colder. "You'll regret this. You'll come crawling back when you realize no one loves you like I do." Then Jason's messages. Erratic, pleading, manipulative. "Just send some cash, sis. I'll fix things. Don't make Mom worry more." Or worse. "If you don't help us, I'll show everyone what kind of daughter you really are." Each notification made my chest tighten. But instead of deleting them, I saved them. Every voicemail, every text, every threat wrapped in guilt. I started keeping a folder on my laptop, labeled simply, proof bank statements. Pawn receipts, screenshots. It wasn't revenge I was building. It was truth, finally documented, finally mine. Weeks turned into months, and my silence grew roots. I learned to cook small meals for one, soups that simmered all afternoon, bread that filled the cabin with warmth. I learned the sound of rain on the roof, how it could soothe me more than any apology ever had. The mirror no longer frightened me. My face was still mine, but softer somehow, no longer hardened by endurance, but by quiet resolve. The faint lines near my eyes weren't from exhaustion anymore. They were from sunlight. I started to dream again, small, simple dreams. Of painting, of traveling, of laughing without the edge of guilt in my throat. And yet, on some nights, when the sea howled against the rocks, I'd still feel the pull of that old life, the need to explain, to fix, to make them understand. But healing, I realized, wasn't about being understood. It was about letting go of needing to be. Freedom, I discovered, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, like dawn through an open window, and stays only if you dare not apologize for it. One evening, Clara came over with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. "You've been quiet lately," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "I'm learning to be," I replied. She raised her glass. "To silence, then." We drank, watching the sun sink into the ocean. The water turned gold, then pink, then a bruised kind of purple that looked like healing itself. I told her a little about my mother, not everything, just enough. She listened without interruption, without judgment. When I finished, she said simply, "Some people mistake control for love. You're brave for leaving. Brave." The word sat in my chest like warmth. No one had ever called me that before. As I lay in bed that night, I thought of my grandmother's necklace, gone, but not forgotten. I imagined it somewhere out there, catching the light on someone else's neck, still holding the memory of freedom in its pearl. Maybe that was what healing meant. Not getting everything back, but learning that not everything lost needs to return. Outside, the ocean breathed steadily, and for the first time in years, I slept without fear. A year changes everything, not in a grand cinematic way, but in the quiet rewiring of habits, the soft rebuilding of a life you once thought was unlivable. The woman I was 12 months ago would have jumped at the sound of her phone, waiting for approval that never came. The woman I am now lets it ring. My apartment is smaller than before. 1 bedroom, a narrow balcony lined with plants that I've somehow kept alive. But every inch of it feels like mine. The air here doesn't demand permission to exist. It smells faintly of coffee and jasmine, not perfume I never chose. My walls are bare except for a single framed photograph. Me on the shore outside the cabin, my hair wind-tangled, my smile unposed. Clara took it before she moved closer to her daughter. Sometimes I catch myself glancing at it and thinking, that's who I fought for. The mornings are quiet now. I wake before dawn, pour coffee into a chipped blue mug, and watch the light pour itself across my kitchen counter. It feels like grace, arriving without apology. At work, I was promoted again, not because I begged or bled for it, but because I've learned to believe I deserve what I've earned. My boss calls me a steady force. I smile when she says that, knowing it took years of chaos to earn calm. It happens on a Thursday, a thin envelope in the mail slot, official looking, with my full name printed in bold black type. I almost ignore it, assuming it's another bank offer or insurance notice, but when I tear it open, my stomach drops. Final notice of debt collection. Amount due, $27,480. Loan account holder, Emily Carter. For a long moment, all I hear is the clock ticking on the wall. I sit at my table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. My coffee has gone cold. At the bottom of the letter, there's a line that makes my heart stutter. Application verified with matching identification and family references provided. Family references. Jason. The realization doesn't come with shock anymore. Just a tired sort of clarity, the kind that arrives when patterns reveal themselves one last time. My brother had used my name, my social security number, to take out loans. For a few seconds, anger roared through me, hot, sharp, immediate. But then something else followed, cooler, cleaner, resolve. I folded the letter carefully, placed it beside my laptop, and took a deep breath. Not again. Not this time. That night, I pulled out the folder I'd kept since the cabin, the one labeled proof. It was heavier now. Screenshots of texts, voicemails, bank transactions, the pawn receipt for my grandmother's necklace. Every piece of evidence that had once felt like clutter now looked like armor. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to a lawyer I'd found online months ago, one who specialized in financial abuse within families. The subject line was simple: need advice regarding identity fraud by sibling. The next morning, she called. Her voice was calm, firm, the kind that doesn't flinch at chaos. "Emily," she said, "you've done the right thing. This isn't revenge. This is protection." For the first time, I believed her. The process wasn't glamorous. It was paperwork, signatures, endless forms and explanations that left me hollow. But I kept going. I met my lawyer, Andrea, in person a week later. Her office smelled faintly of lemon and something warm, maybe courage. She wore no jewelry, just a simple silver band on her finger. As we reviewed my documents, she said, "People often mistake family loyalty for debt. But love isn't supposed to bankrupt you." I nodded, eyes stinging. My mother always said sacrifice was proof of love. Andrea looked at me for a long time before replying, "That's not love. That's leverage." Something inside me shifted then, like a door unlatched. Therapy became a different kind of mirror after that. "I don't owe her anything," I said one evening. The words trembling but real. My therapist smiled gently. "How does it feel to say that out loud?" I took a deep breath, like breathing after holding it for 30 years. Because it was true. Every sacrifice I'd made had been a transaction written in invisible ink. Every good daughter moment came with a price tag attached. And now I was done paying. I started journaling again, not as a record of pain, but as a promise to myself. I wrote about boundaries, about rest, about forgiveness that didn't mean reconciliation. One night, under the soft hum of my desk lamp, I wrote a letter to my mother. Not to send, just to close the chapter. It began simply. "Dear Mom, you taught me that love means giving until you're empty. I'm learning that real love, the kind I'm building now, lets you stay whole. You made dependents, not children. But I've become my own mother now. I take care of the little girl you overlooked. I feed her, protect her, listen when she cries. And she's starting to trust me again. I hope one day you find peace too. But it won't come from me anymore. Emily," when I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beneath my grandmother's empty jewelry box. A symbol reclaimed, not replaced. Months passed and the case moved forward. Jason ignored the legal notices at first, just like he'd ignored responsibility his entire life. Mom called me twice, leaving voicemails drenched in accusation. "How could you do this to your own brother? You're destroying the family." But her words no longer hooked into me. They fell like rain against a closed window. I could hear them, but I stayed dry. Andrea advised patience. "Justice is slow," she said, "but it always arrives eventually." So I waited. And while I waited, I lived. I redecorated my apartment. Small changes that felt enormous. New curtains, a second-hand chair by the window, a soft rug that matched nothing but made me happy. Every choice I made was mine, and that was enough. Sometimes I wondered if my mother ever sat alone and realized what she'd done, if she ever looked around and saw the emptiness her control had created. Maybe she told herself a different story, one where she was the victim, and I was the cold, ungrateful daughter. But I'd stopped needing to edit her version. Truth doesn't need to convince. It just needs to exist. The final document arrived one late afternoon in spring. The case was settled in my favor. Jason was held responsible for the debt, and my credit was cleared. It wasn't triumph I felt, not even relief. Just stillness, like the quiet after a storm. That night, I lit a candle by the window. Outside, the city hummed softly, life moving on. I poured a glass of wine and whispered to no one. You did it. Not with revenge. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. In the reflection of the glass, I caught my own eyes, calm, steady, unfamiliar in the best way. I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't see my mother's daughter. I saw myself. I hadn't seen the house in nearly 5 years. But when I turned onto our old street, everything felt smaller, like childhood memories had been stretched too large to fit the truth. The once bright shutters had faded to dull beige. The rosebush she used to trim obsessively was now wild, thorns overtaking the walkway. Even the porch light flickered, struggling against the dusk. It was strange. The house I used to fear felt powerless now. Time had stripped it of its authority. As I parked the car by the curb, I noticed my hands weren't shaking. For years I imagined this moment, rehearsed it in dreams and therapy sessions, crafting the perfect words. But now that I was here, I didn't need a speech. The silence itself had become fluent. The envelope sat on the passenger seat beside me, thick with documents, stamped with legal weight. My name on every page, correctly spelled this time. I glanced at the silver ring lying next to it, her ring. The symbol of family unity, she called it, the one she'd made me wear at every family dinner like a badge of loyalty. It had grown heavier over the years, not in metal, but in meaning. I slipped it off, held it in my palm for a moment. It felt cold. Then I placed it beside the envelope. For a second, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "You're not here to win. You're here to end it." Then I stepped out of the car. The porch creaked as I walked up, the same porch that used to groan under the weight of my teenage pacing whenever she'd lock me out for talking back. I pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed inside. Sharp, mechanical, familiar, through the frosted glass. I saw movement. Then, the sound of slippers scuffing across hardwood. The door opened halfway before she realized who stood there. Emily? Her voice was thin, unsure, like she'd forgotten how to use my name. I hadn't expected her to look so small. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was streaked with gray. The crisp blouses she wore like armor had been replaced by an oversized cardigan, sleeves tugged over trembling hands. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said softly, "Hi, Mom." Her lips parted, but no words came out, only the faint sound of her breath. She stepped back automatically, the way you do when faced with something you don't yet understand. I walked inside. The living room smelled of dust and fading perfume, the same floral scent she used to drown herself in before every argument, like she could perfume her conscience. The framed photos were still there. Jason at graduation, Mom in her Sunday dress, the three of us smiling like a perfect family, except for one picture missing, the one of me. I glanced toward the mantel. There was a faint outline of where the frame had once sat, a rectangle of cleaner paint. "Where's my picture?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "It broke," I turned to face her. "Everything does eventually," her lips pressed together. "You didn't have to come here." "Yes," I said, pulling the envelope from my bag. "I did." I placed it on the table between us, the same wooden table where she'd once slid bills toward me with practiced sorrow, asking for just a little help until next month. Now it was my turn. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is everything. The loans Jason took out in my name, the accounts he forged, the fraud, the debts, all traced. I've filed charges. The court knows everything." Her face paled, the lines around her mouth deepening. "Jason didn't mean..." "He did," I interrupted. "And you knew..." Her hand gripped the edge of the table. "You're going to destroy your own brother?" I met her eyes, the same eyes that once made me doubt my every emotion. "No," I said quietly. "He destroyed himself. I'm just refusing to clean up his mess anymore." Her expression twisted, part disbelief, part anger. "You wouldn't do this to your own mother." That word, mother, used like a shield again. I exhaled slowly. You did this to yourself, silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room, it presses down on it. She looked away, her eyes darting to the floor, the walls, anywhere but me. For once, she had no script to follow, no guilt to weaponize. I did what I had to, she murmured finally. Family takes care of family. Family doesn't steal identities, I said evenly. Family doesn't break their children and call it love. Her breath hitched. I could see her searching for the old rhythm, the tears, the trembling voice, the plea for sympathy. But something in her had calcified too much for that now. I watched as the realization crossed her face, that her silence, her denial had finally run out of power. I slid the papers across the table toward her. You'll get official notice soon. I just wanted you to hear it from me first. She didn't reach for them, just stared, her lips trembling. Emily, please. The word didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like habit. I stood. You taught me that silence was strength, but silence was just your way of keeping control. I'm done inheriting your quiet. The last light of the day spilled through the window, washing the room in gold and shadow. Dust floated in the air like ghosts. She finally looked up. You hate me? No, I said, and my voice surprised even me. Steady, soft, true. I don't hate you. I just don't belong to you anymore. Her eyes glistened. For a second, I saw something flicker there. Maybe regret. Maybe the echo of a woman who once loved her children before fear made her cruel. But it was fleeting, gone before I could name it. I picked up my bag. You always said I'd come back one day, I said, turning toward the door. You were right, but I didn't come back for you. I came back for me. Outside, the air was cool, the kind of calm that settles only after a storm has spent itself. I sat in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel, and looked at the house one last time. Through the window, I could see her, still standing there, motionless, as if the truth had turned her to stone. On the passenger seat, the ring caught the fading sunlight. I picked it up, feeling its weight one last time. The engraving inside, for family, always, shimmered faintly. I placed it on the seat, right beside the envelope she hadn't opened. Poetic symmetry, I thought. Just as she once left me bills on that kitchen table, I was leaving her something of mine. Only this time, it wasn't debt. It was closure. As I drove away, the sunset painted the horizon in amber and rose. The same road I once fled down now carried me home. Not to a place, but to peace. No tears, no anger. Just a quiet certainty that I'd broken the cycle. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Older, yes, but softer somehow. My eyes no longer searching for permission. I smiled. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sighs. The way the sky exhales when the day is finally done. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like anyone's daughter. I felt like myself.